Picture a farmhouse with the lights on, a freezer running, power tools spinning in the barn, and not a single wire connecting it to the outside world. No meter, no pole, no bill ever arriving in the mailbox. For some Amish households across Pennsylvania and Ohio, that isn't a hypothetical. It's been daily life for decades. And the system that makes it possible isn't some primitive workaround. It's a deliberately engineered setup that costs a fraction of what a modern rooftop solar installation runs, with none of the contracts, none of the loans, and none of the monthly fees. Most people assume the Amish simply live without electricity altogether. Candles, hand tools, nothing modern. That assumption is wrong, and it's been wrong for a long time. Many Amish workshops run freezers, power tools, and lighting every single day. The difference isn't that they reject electricity. The difference is they generate it differently, store it differently, and refuse to pay anyone else for the privilege of using it. I'm the voice behind NexReveal, a channel built around digging up the practical knowledge that quietly disappeared somewhere between the rise of big utilities and the modern obsession with complicated, expensive technology. We look at the tools, techniques, and systems that worked for generations before anyone decided you needed a corporation's permission to use them. This topic is one of the clearest examples we found, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a system built from around $300 in parts can quietly outperform a $30,000 rooftop installation in the one moment that actually matters, when the power goes out. So let's start with the idea. Everyone gets wrong first. Most people believe solar power only makes sense as a massive whole house system. Panels covering the roof, a battery wall in the garage, an inverter tied directly into the home's main panel, all installed by a licensed contractor and financed over 20 years. That's the image the solar industry sells, and for a lot of homes, it's genuinely the right approach. But it's not the only approach, and it's definitely not the cheapest one. What actually happens in many off-grid Amish workshops is something far simpler. Instead of one enormous system trying to power an entire house, you build small, independent circuits, each one dedicated to a single appliance. A panel, a battery, a charge controller, and an inverter, wired together to do exactly one job. Keep a freezer cold, run a shop light, power a water pump, nothing more. The scientific principle behind why this works so well comes down to something engineers call generation proximity. The closer you generate power to where you use it, the less you lose, and the less complexity you need to manage it. A national grid has to move electricity across hundreds of miles of transmission lines through transformers, substations, and metering equipment, all of which require maintenance, staffing, and billing infrastructure. A single solar panel sitting 20 feet from a chest freezer skips nearly all of that. There's no transmission loss worth worrying about, no infrastructure to maintain beyond the parts themselves, and nothing standing between the sun and the appliance except a battery and a small control circuit. CTA1, if ideas like this, practical, historically grounded, slightly subversive knowledge most people never get taught, are the reason you're here. This is exactly the kind of thing NexReveal digs into every week. Subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming next. Here's where the actual numbers come in, because this is where the story stops being theoretical. A basic 100-watt solar panel, the kind sold through rural supply stores and farm co-ops, typically runs somewhere around $70 to $90. A lithium iron phosphate battery, the same chemistry trusted in modern home backup systems, costs roughly $130 to $180 depending on capacity. Add a small charge controller, usually $20 to $30, and a basic pure sine wave inverter in the $35 to $50 range, and you're looking at a complete functional system for somewhere around $300, give or take, plus a small amount for wiring, connectors, and critically, fuses. That last part matters more than people realize. A correctly sized inline fuse is the cheapest, least glamorous component in the entire build, and it's also the single most important safety feature. Skipping it to save a few dollars is how small electrical mistakes turn into house fires. Any version of this system, no matter how simple, needs proper fusing on the battery side, full stop. Now compare that $300 to what a typical residential rooftop solar quote looks like today. Often $20,000 to $40,000 once battery backup is included, frequently financed over 15 to 25 years. And here's the detail most homeowners don't learn until it's too late. Many grid-tied systems are designed, for genuine safety reasons, to shut themselves off automatically when the grid goes down. That protects utility workers from a system unexpectedly feeding power back into a line they believe is dead. But it also means the expensive system you financed for decades can go dark at the exact moment you need it most. During a storm, during an outage, during the night your neighborhood loses power for 6 hours. A small, standalone direct task circuit has no such failure point because it was never connected to the grid to begin with. But that's only part of the story. The deeper question is why this kind of simple system never became the mainstream solar pitch in the first place. And the answer has less to do with engineering than with economics. In 1978, the United States passed the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act, a real piece of federal legislation intended to encourage smaller-scale renewable energy production and open the door for independent power generation. In practice, the solar industry that grew up afterward built itself almost entirely around grid-tied, professionally installed finance systems, because that's where the money was. A contractor can't sell a 25-year loan on a $300 setup. There's no recurring service contract to write, no financing arrangement to profit from, no commission to earn. The simple version of solar was never illegal or hidden in some conspiratorial sense. It just never had anyone with a financial incentive to advertise it. The historical roots of this approach go back even further than most people expect, to the early 20th century, before rural electrification reached most American farms. Companies like Delco Light, founded by engineer Charles Kettering, sold small generator and battery systems to rural households throughout the 1910s and 1920s, long before utility lines stretched into the countryside. These systems paired a small gasoline engine, a bank of lead-acid batteries, and a basic distribution panel to run lights, and a handful of appliances independent of any centralized grid. When the Rural Electrification Administration brought power lines to nearly every American farm by the late 1940s, most households abandoned these systems entirely. Demand collapsed, and companies stopped making the equipment. In many Amish and Old Order communities, that knowledge didn't disappear. It adapted. Communities that chose, for religious and cultural reasons, not to connect to the public grid kept the underlying principle alive. A battery bank charged by whatever source was available, originally wind or water power, later small generators, and eventually, as panel prices fell, solar. That continuity is well documented by researchers and journalists who've studied Amish energy use over the past 2 decades, and it explains why these communities adopted small-scale solar relatively early, even while rejecting connection to the public utility grid. What changed everything more recently wasn't the panels, it was the battery. Lead-acid batteries, the standard for most of the 20th century, are heavy, need ventilation, degrade after 3 to 5 years, and can be damaged badly if drained too far. Lithium iron phosphate batteries, which became commercially affordable roughly a decade ago, solve nearly every one of those problems. They last 15 to 20 years instead of 3 to 5, weigh a fraction as much, don't off-gas, and tolerate deep discharge without damage. That single shift in chemistry is what turned a fragile, maintenance-heavy off-grid setup into something closer to install it and mostly forget it. CTA 2. If you're the kind of person who'd rather understand how something actually works than just be told to trust the experts, NexReveal is built for exactly that, and there's a lot more of this kind of history waiting in the rest of the channel. So what does this actually mean if you're not Amish, not off-grid, and not building a homestead from scratch? More than you'd think. Imagine the appliances in your own home that run constantly, day and night, whether you're paying attention to them or not. A chest freezer in the garage, a well pump, a porch light left on through the evening. These are exactly the kinds of loads a small, dedicated direct task circuit was built for. You're not rewiring your house. You're not calling an electrician. You're not pulling a permit. You unplug one appliance from the wall and plug it into an inverter powered by its own dedicated panel and battery instead. Nothing else in the home changes. That said, it's worth being honest about the limits. This approach works well for small, steady loads. Freezers, lighting, pumps, fans, electronics. It is not a replacement for whole home power, air conditioning, or anything pulling serious, continuous wattage. And anything beyond plugging a single appliance into a standalone inverter, anything that touches your home's actual wiring or attempts to feed power back toward the grid, crosses into work that should only be done by a licensed electrician with a correct transfer switch to prevent dangerous backfeeding and keep you on the right side of your local electrical code. The appeal of this system is its simplicity. The moment it stops being simple, the risk profile changes completely. What's striking, when you step back, isn't really the wiring diagram. It's the underlying assumption these communities never accepted in the first place. The idea that electricity has to come bundled with a corporation, a meter, and a monthly invoice. For most of human history, that wasn't true at all. It only became the default once an entire industry formed around delivering and billing for power at scale. The Amish workshops still running on $300 circuits aren't rejecting modern technology. They're rejecting the idea that modern technology has to be expensive, complicated, or owned by someone else. CTA 3, if this is the kind of forgotten practical knowledge you want more of, subscribe to NexReveal. There's a lot more buried history like this waiting to be uncovered, and I'd rather you hear it here than not at all. The lesson underneath all of this isn't really about solar panels or batteries. It's about a habit of mind, the willingness to ask whether a problem is actually as complicated as the people selling the solution want you to believe. Sometimes it is, and sometimes the real answer has been sitting quietly in a barn in Pennsylvania for 50 years, costing $300 in one afternoon of honest work.